My sister betrayed me with my boyfriend. They got married and had a baby while my mother defended them. But when he started stalking me with secret photos and notes, police arrested him and left my family shattered. I'm 24 years old. I work in digital marketing, and honestly, I need to get this story off my chest because what happened last year basically destroyed any illusion I had about what family means. The thing is, I always thought my sister and I were close. You know, we weren't best friends or anything like that, but we were sisters and that was supposed to mean something, right? Turns out it didn't mean shit. Let me start from the beginning, because if not, this isn't going to make sense. Like 2 years ago. I mean, when I was 22, I met Derek at a work conference. One of those boring ones where everyone is networking and pretending they care about what the other person does. He worked in software development, and I had just gotten my first decent job after college. It wasn't love at first sight or anything that cheesy, but we connected well. We started dating, and after a few months, things got serious. He was the typical good boyfriend. You know, he'd bring me coffee when I had heavy days at work. He'd send me stupid memes at midnight. That kind of stuff that makes you think you found someone special. After being together for like a year, I decided it was time for him to meet my family. Big mistake? Literally the worst mistake of my life. But obviously, I didn't know that at the time. My family was always complicated. Like, my mom is one of those super traditional people who worry too much about appearances and what the neighbors are going to think. My dad was calmer but kind of emotionally absent. And then there were my sisters. Kimberly, who's 2 years younger than me, was always the favorite, the pretty one, the one who could do whatever she wanted and mom would find a way to justify it. Ruby, the youngest, was like 9 years old back then, and was the only one worth anything in that whole house, honestly. The first time Derek went to dinner at my parents' house, everything seemed normal. Kimberly was there, being all flirty like she always was with any man who breathed, but I thought it was just her personality. You know? It never occurred to me that anything could happen. We were sisters. Derek was my boyfriend. There were codes that weren't supposed to be broken. But looking back, I should have seen it coming because Kimberly had always been like that, always wanting what I had, always competing with me in ways I didn't even know we were competing. Things started getting weird. Like 3 months after that dinner, Derek began acting different, like more distant, checking his phone all the time and putting it face down when I was around. I'd ask him what was wrong and he'd say nothing, that he was just stressed about work, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him. But one night, we were watching a movie at my apartment, and he fell asleep on the couch. His phone started ringing and I grabbed it to turn it off, but the screen lit up and I saw a message from Kimberly. And it wasn't a normal message like, "Hi, how are you?" It was something like, "Can't stop thinking about the other night," with a blushing face emoji. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling like someone had thrown a bucket of cold water on me. I opened the messages. You know, I know it's wrong to check your partner's phone, but at that moment, I didn't care. And what I found basically destroyed me. Messages and messages between them. Flirting, making plans to see each other when I was at work, photos that definitely weren't appropriate. And the worst part, the worst, was that there were messages from before he even met my family, which meant that somehow they had connected through social media or something and were already talking before they even met in person. I woke Derek up right there. Like, I shook him and put the phone in his face. He tried to deny it at first, then tried to minimize it, saying they were just messages and didn't mean anything, and finally admitted that yes, something had happened between them, but it was a mistake and he was really sorry. I kicked him out of my apartment, obviously, and then I stayed there alone in my living room crying until I basically had no more tears left. I couldn't process that my sister, had done something like that. The next day, I went straight to my parents' house. It was a Saturday morning and the whole family was there having breakfast like nothing. I walked through the door and saw Kimberly sitting there eating pancakes calmly, and something in me just exploded. I yelled at her everything I had been holding in front of my parents, in front of Ruby, who didn't understand what was happening, and Kimberly didn't even have the decency to deny it. She just sat there with that I don't care face and said something like, "It's not my fault your boyfriend prefers me." My parents at first didn't know what to do. My dad looked devastated, like genuinely sad about what had happened, and he told Kimberly she had to leave the house for a while. My mom was crying, but she was also angry. At me. Can you believe it? She told me I was making a scene and that these things happen, and that I should be more mature about it. I told her that if she thought I was the problem, then clearly she had raised her daughters very differently, and I left there swearing I wasn't going back. Like 2 weeks passed, and my cousin, the only person in the family I was still talking to besides Ruby, called me to tell me that Kimberly had come back to the house. Apparently, she had gone crying to my parents saying she was pregnant with Derek's baby. And somehow that changed the whole narrative because now it was about the baby and being a family and supporting each other and all that shit. My mom basically forgave everything because she was going to be a grandmother again, and my dad, although uncomfortable with the situation, decided not to cause more drama. I cut contact with everyone except Ruby. I'd send her messages every now and then to make sure she was okay, and she'd tell me things about, as the house, but I asked her not to tell me anything about Kimberly because I didn't want to know. I found out through my cousin that Derek and Kimberly had officially gotten together, that my parents were supporting them, and that basically I was the villain of the story now because I refused to forgive and move on. My mom was telling people I was being dramatic and that I had exaggerated everything, as if discovering that your sister slept with your boyfriend was something you're supposed to get over in a week. Fast forward like 8 months. Ruby sent me a message saying that Kimberly and Derek were getting married. The wedding was going to be at my parents' house, something small because supposedly Kimberly wanted something intimate, but the truth was they probably didn't want many people to know the whole story behind it. Obviously they didn't invite me, and honestly I wouldn't have gone even if they had asked me on their knees. But what did hurt me was finding out later, from Ruby, that they told all the guests I couldn't come because I was working in another state. They didn't even have the guts to tell the truth. They had to make up an excuse to look good themselves. The thing is, I could have continued like that. You know? I'm never talking to them again and building my life without them. And I would have been fine with that. But then my dad died. It was super sudden, like a heart attack out of nowhere. Although I found out later from my cousin that he had been sick for months, and nobody had told me. I didn't even get the chance to say goodbye to him, to tell him I forgave him for letting everything happen, to ask him why he chose to keep me in the dark about his health. I went to the funeral, obviously, and it was the most awkward thing in my life. Kimberly was there with her huge belly, like 8 months already, and Derek by her side playing the attentive husband. My mom was devastated, but still found time to look at me with a disapproving face when I arrived, and Ruby ran toward me and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. During the whole ceremony, I could feel the stares of all the relatives who clearly had heard different versions of the story and didn't know what to think of me. A week after the funeral, my dad's lawyer called all of us in for the reading of the will. I wasn't expecting anything. I honestly thought my dad had probably removed me from the will after all the drama, so I went mostly out of curiosity. But it turns out my dad left me 40% of everything he had. 40%. He left Ruby 30%, my mom 20%, and Kimberly only 10%. Kimberly's face when the lawyer read that was something I'm going to treasure forever. She literally turned red and looked like she was going to explode. My mom started crying, saying this was going to divide the family more, that my dad wasn't in his right mind when he made the will, that it wasn't fair. Kimberly stood up and started yelling that I had manipulated Dad, that somehow I had convinced him to change the will to punish her, which didn't make any sense because I hadn't even talked to my dad in months before his death. Derek also got involved, saying they should contest the will, that clearly something wasn't right. I just sat there in shock because I wasn't expecting any of this. The lawyer gave me an envelope after everyone left. He said my dad had asked him to deliver it to me personally. Inside was a handwritten letter, and it was basically my dad apologizing for everything. For not having defended me when the thing with Kimberly and Derek happened, for letting my mom treat me like the bad guy in the movie, for not having been the father he should have been. He said the reason he was leaving me, the biggest part of his inheritance, was because he wanted to make sure I was okay, that he knew Kimberly had Derek and my mom to take care of her, but that I was alone and needed that support. He also asked me to take care of Ruby, to make sure that when she grew up, she had someone to trust. I cried so much reading that letter that I had to stay in my car in the lawyer's parking lot for like an hour before I could drive home. I thought that was the end of the drama. But oh no, things were just getting started. Like 2 days after the will reading, Kimberly and Derek showed up at my apartment. I don't know how they got my address because I had moved recently and hadn't given it to anyone in the family except Ruby. They rang the doorbell, and when I opened the door thinking it was a delivery or something, there they were. Derek started with a super rehearsed speech about how families should support each other and how they were going through financial difficulties with the baby on the way. And basically, they wanted me to give up my part of the inheritance and divide it between Kimberly and my mom. I told them to leave, obviously. But Kimberly got all dramatic, saying that Dad would have wanted me to help, that he wouldn't have wanted the family to be destroyed over money. I told her that maybe she should have thought about family before sleeping with my boyfriend, and Derek had the balls to tell me I needed to get over that already. I closed the door in their faces and called building security to make sure they wouldn't let them come up again. But they didn't stop there. I started receiving messages from unknown numbers, like nasty stuff calling me selfish, telling me I was a bad daughter, that my dad would be disappointed in me. My mom also started calling me, which she hadn't done in months, but it was just to tell me the same thing, that I needed to think about the family, that Kimberly needed me. I told her that Kimberly didn't need me when she decided to betray me in the worst possible way, and that now I didn't need her either. I hung up on her and blocked all the unknown numbers that had been sending me messages. Like 3 weeks of relative peace passed. And then one morning I went out to my car to go to work, and all 4 tires were slashed. Not deflated, slashed, like with a knife or something. I called the police and told them everything that had been happening with my family. They made a report but said that without proof of who did it, they couldn't do much. I gave them Kimberly and Derek's names, told them the whole story about the will, but they basically told me I needed to have more evidence if I wanted them to do anything. I installed security cameras in my apartment that same week. I also hired a lawyer. A good one who cost me a ton of money, but who said he could help me legally protect myself from any harassment by my family. He suggested I get a restraining order if things kept escalating, and I thought maybe he was exaggerating, but he told me it was better to be safe than sorry. 2 weeks later, I received a package at my door. It had no return address, just my name and address. Inside was a notebook, one of those cheap ones you buy at any store, and it was full of notes about me, about my routines, what time I left my apartment, what days I went to the gym, where I bought coffee, everything. There were photos, too, of me walking down the street, entering my building, at the supermarket. Someone had been following me and documenting everything, and the notebook had to be Derek's because I recognized his handwriting from some documents I had seen before when we were together. I got horrible panic. I called my lawyer immediately, and he told me to go to the police station with the notebook and the photos. This time they did take me seriously. Like when they saw all that evidence of harassment and stalking, they started asking questions and taking note of everything. My lawyer requested an emergency restraining order against Derek, and the judge approved it the same day. They also put a temporary restraining order against Kimberly, even though the photos were clearly taken by Derek, because my lawyer argued she was complicit in all the harassment. On the police's recommendation, I went to stay at a hotel for a few days while they investigated. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not even Ruby, because I didn't trust that the information wouldn't reach Kimberly or Derek somehow. I felt paranoid all the time, looking over my shoulder, checking if anyone was following me. It's a horrible feeling, not feeling safe in your own city, in your own life, because of people who are supposed to be your family. I was at the hotel when my cousin called me. She was crying, telling me she had just found out about everything that had been happening because my mom had told her. But from her perspective, obviously, where I was the crazy one who was harassing Kimberly and Derek, and they were just trying to protect themselves. I told her the truth, sent her photos of the notebook and the slashed tires, and she was silent for a long moment, and then just said, "I'm sorry. I had no idea." She told me she was going to talk to my mom, that she was going to try to make her understand the reality of the situation, but I told her not to bother, that my mom had already chosen her side a long time ago. And the restraining order became permanent after a hearing where I presented all the evidence. Derek didn't even show up to defend himself, which made everything easier. But like 2 days after the hearing, the hotel manager called my room, saying there was a man asking about me at the reception, describing my appearance and saying he was my brother. I don't have brothers. I told her to call the police, and I stayed locked in my room with all the lights off until the officers arrived. It was Derek. He had found out where I was staying. I don't know how. Maybe following my car from my apartment or something. And he was trying to get up to my room. When the police arrived, he was trying to convince the hotel staff that it was a family emergency and that he needed to talk to me urgently. The cops arrested him right there for violating the restraining order. And honestly, seeing him handcuffed and put in the patrol car was the most satisfying thing I had felt in months. My lawyer told me that with this arrest, plus all the previous evidence of harassment, we could have Derek face criminal charges. Kimberly was also in trouble because they found messages on Derek's phone where she was giving him information about me, basically helping him harass me. My mom hired lawyers for both of them, obviously, probably spending a ton of the inheritance my dad left her, and the whole situation became a giant legal mess. I moved again, this time to an apartment in a building with 24-hour security, cameras everywhere, and a super strict policy about visitors. I didn't give my new address to anyone except my lawyer and my boss at work. Ruby would write me asking how I was, saying she missed talking to me, and it broke my heart not being able to tell her where I was or what was really happening. I'd send her messages every now and then telling her I was okay, that I loved her, and that when she was older, we'd be able to spend more time together. The criminal case against Derek is still in process. Like, he's going to go to court in a few months. Kimberly had her baby like 2 months ago, a girl, and my cousin sent me photos even though I didn't ask her to. I didn't feel anything looking at those photos. Honestly, no anger, no sadness, nothing. I just thought that baby wasn't to blame for any of this, and that she was probably going to grow up in a super toxic environment if Kimberly and Derek stayed together. My mom tried to contact me one more time like a month ago. She sent me a long letter, like 6 pages, where she basically said that all this had gotten out of control, that family was more important than pride, that I should forgive, because that's what good Christians do. She also said my dad wouldn't have wanted this, that he would have wanted all of us to get along. I sent her a letter back, super short, where I only said that Dad left me a letter where he literally apologized for not having protected me from her and Kimberly, so don't use his name to try to manipulate me. I haven't heard anything from her since then. Right now, I'm using part of the inheritance to pay my lawyers, which is ironic because Kimberly wanted me to give up the money for her, and now that money is going toward protecting myself from her and her husband. I'm also in therapy, like twice a week, because processing all this shit isn't something I can do alone. My therapist says I'm showing signs of PTSD from all the harassment and threats, which makes sense because I still get nervous when I see cars parked for too long near my building, or when someone looks at me for too long on the street. The part that hurts the most, honestly, isn't the Kimberly and Derek thing. I mean, yeah, that was horrible, and they betrayed me in the worst possible way. But in a way, I think I always knew Kimberly was capable of something like that. What really destroys me is my mom. The fact that she saw everything they did to me, all the harassment, the threats, the stalking, and still chose to defend them. She chose to protect the daughter who betrayed me and the guy who harassed me over protecting me, and I can't forgive that. I don't think I ever can. Ruby sent me a message last week asking me if I was ever going to come back home to visit them. I told her the truth, that house stopped being my home a long time ago, but that when she was older and could make her own decisions, I was going to be there for her. She responded with a heart and an I love you. And that made me cry, because she's literally the only person from that family who's worth it. I'm rebuilding my life little by little. I made new friends. People from work who don't know anything about this whole story and who treat me normal. I'm going out with a new guy, someone I met in a hiking group, and who's exactly the opposite of Derek in every possible way. Honest and straightforward, and who actually respects boundaries. I told him the whole story after going out for like 2 months, and he just hugged me and said he understood why I was so careful, and that we were going to take things at my pace. And that's enough for now, I guess.